Hello, everyone. Welcome to Under the Dome presented by Nevada Policy. I'm your host, Marcos Lopez, your Outreach and Coalitions Director. It is the end of week 8, or approaching the end of week 8. We are halfway through the legislative session, 8 more weeks to go. Important dates to keep in mind is April 4th. Budgets will begin closing, and April 14th, the first committee passage deadline. Now, we're going to go a little bit quicker today than we have in previous updates. We want to make sure we get enough time for our guests and be able to discuss what they have going on. Our main highlight that we do want to focus on this week, however, is the 5 bills that the governor introduced. These 5 bills are important pieces of his agenda that he campaigned on, and it's pretty much a representation of promises that he made on the campaign trail that got him elected and an attempt to fulfill those promises. There's 2 on education, 1 on crime, 1 on restructuring the executive branch, and the last one is on election administration. So we'll start with the first one, which is AB 400. This is a K-12 education omnibus. It proposes a broad range of changes to the school formula and the way that the education system is run. One of the key components on there is the read by third, reinstating this provision that was repealed in 2019 by the Democratic-led legislature. Basically, if a child does not obtain the required reading score on a standardized exam on their reading, they will not be allowed to continue on to 4th grade. This is an important measure of accountability. It's something that he campaigned on the trail. And it's something that we need to keep in mind that, if we have our Vegas, Clark County schools being the worst in the nation for quality, why aren't we imposing these checks on our teachers and the education that our students are receiving? For school choice activists, there are 3 important components in this that I think everyone would be very happy for. The first is the creation of the Office of School Choice. This is part of a push to expand school choice. This new office would administer the opportunity scholarships in our state, as well as be a resource and an advocate for school choice in our state. For opportunity scholarships within this bill, it would increase the current cap for households of 300% of the federal poverty threshold up to 500% of that level, as well as remove the current cap on funding for opportunity scholarships and raise it up potentially as far as $150 million. The last component the school choice advocates would be happy with is open zoning. This is for public schools. So if there's a public school outside the home area of a parent that they would like to send their child, if there is space in that school, they would be allowed to do so. This is also paired for a piece that allows for transportation funding for charter schools. So a lot to be happy there for school choice advocates. And the last piece of the bill is helping create a state educator pipeline by allowing and promoting more students to pursue higher education. SB 431, this is a revamp of the state government of how the executive branch is kind of structured. It would add 5 cabinet secretaries. One of them would be in public safety and military affairs, 1 for commerce and administration, 1 for energy, environment, and public works, 1 for health and human services, and the last one would be for education and workforce. The idea here is to provide more assistance to the governor in the implementation of their policy agendas, people that will help them review different proposed regulations and help administer the almost over 200 different boards and agencies that reside in our state government. We think this is a pretty positive move. It's really modernizing the way that our executive branch operates in the state. The 2 other things that we like within this bill at Nevada Policy is the way that it is addressing DETR, something that we've been critical of since the pandemic, of the way that the process and the organization and structure of that department has been. That is the department that administers unemployment insurance benefits. And the last thing that we definitely like in this bill is the expansion on the rainy day fund. It raises the cap on the state's rainy day fund to encourage more state savings and allow for more savings. This is something that we've been advocating a lot with our budget surplus that we are concerned about. Want to make sure we're saving enough money for any future economic downturn. If we look at the recent Economist, a lot of their surveys show that they're concerned about recession occurring within the next year. So we want to make sure that we are saving enough money to be able to buttress against any economic downturn. And another thing that we have advocated in Nevada Policy is the creation of a special fund to pay down our PERS debt, which has reached an all-time high of over $8 billion of unfunded liabilities. We do have one concern on it that we are keeping an eye on, which is the Nevada Way account. We're concerned that this could become another corporate welfare slush fund, similar to the Catalyst Fund that existed under Brian Sandoval. We have been very critical of these over the past years, and we'll continue to question which is the best way to drive economic growth within our economy through free market means, or whether it's through government-directed subsidies. Another interesting piece that he brought up was SB 412. This is his crime and public safety legislation. This is the Crime Reduction Act. A lot of pieces that it would include in there is increased penalties for fentanyl possession, making any possession of the drug in any amount a Category B felony, punishable by 1 to 20 years of imprisonment. It will revise provisions in 2019's Omnibus Criminal Justice Bill. That was AB 236, which was championed by Speaker of the Assembly, Steve Yeager. One of the items in particular that it would tackle is the threshold of which a theft becomes a felony, lowering the current threshold of $1,200 to $750. It also will increase minimum and maximum penalties for drivers convicted of driving under the influence who cause death or substantial bodily harm. His fourth bill was AB 330. This is the school discipline legislation, which would repeal parts of the 2019 restorative justice law. We talked a little bit about this last week, so I'm not going to dive into it too much. And we're just going to move on along to SB 405, which is an election administration reform bill. Key components is requiring voter ID, eliminating universal mail voting, and requiring all ballots to be received by the close of polls on election day. Our communications director, Kevin Dietrich, wrote a great piece kind of reviewing this whole legislation on nevadapolicy.org. So I'm not going to dive into it as well, but I encourage you all to go to nevadapolicy.org, where Kevin's article can be found, where he goes through the different platforms of this piece of legislation. One of the big themes this past week, and has really been a theme this whole session, has been healthcare under attack. There has been all sorts of different Democratic proposals thrown out to take over healthcare in our state and erecting price controls and really taking over entire sections of our healthcare system. As we've noted in the past, AB 85 fixes prices for outpatient procedures being presented forward by Assemblyman Orentlicker. But two of the ones that we want to highlight this week is AB 6, which establishes into law an executive order by Governor Steve Sisolak that required healthcare benchmarking costs, as well as AB 11, which seeks to prohibit a hospital or psychiatric hospital from employing full-time physicians. These are more government interventions into our healthcare system, really upsetting the supply and demand feature that makes our free market economy work. We should be concerned about these legislation. We'll continue to be critical, just as we've been with SB 420 of the last legislative session, which was the public option component, and AB 85 that I have already mentioned. There was also a hearing of something we have discussed here in previous weeks, which was the Medicaid expansion of SB 419 that was brought forward by Senator Fabian Deontay. This is, of course, what we've discussed, that we would expand Medicaid to illegal immigrants within our state. We have some serious concerns about what this would mean for budgetary costs. This is an issue that we have written quite a bit, kind of extending on the whole concept of Medicaid expansion, going back to the original Obamacare expansion during Governor Sandoval. So that is kind of a quick wrap up than we normally usually do, so we can try to get to our guests coming up. Today we have a wide range of guests joining us, from Senate Minority Leader Heidi Gansert, Senator Jeff Stone, Dean Clancy of Americans for Prosperity, Assemblywoman Danielle Gallant, and Geoffrey Lawrence of our own Nevada Policy. Heidi Gansert is the Senate Minority Leader. You have tons of experience. You currently serve on the Senate Finance, Senate Legislative Operations and Elections, Senate Revenue and Economic Developer, and you were also the Assembly Minority Leader at one point and Chief of Staff under Governor Sandoval. You have pretty much done it all in the state. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Good to be with you today, Marcos.
So one of the things I wanted to discuss was you have a bunch of different legislation forward, but first I wanted to discuss what are some of the general caucus priorities that you have for this legislative session, and how is it all running today in terms of the general dynamics within the caucus?
Thank you for that question. And so, one of the things at the top of our list is school choice. We want to make sure that charter schools are funded like your regular public schools. And we also like the Opportunity Scholarship scholarships for those children when the public schools do not fit their needs. We want them to have the option to go to a private school. And sometimes that's because the school that they're zoned for is underperforming. Sometimes it's because they're bullied. Sometimes it's because they have disabilities. And so we want to make sure children have the best chance and the best education possible. And the opportunity scholarships and the charter schools are really great options. And just as a little data note, the charter school district across the state of Nevada, so the charter schools that are sponsored by the state of Nevada, is the second largest school district. There's actually more students in charter schools than in Washoe County School District. So Clark County, of course, is first, then it's the charter schools, and then it's Washoe County School District. And those charter schools are distributed across the state.
Well, that is an interesting stat to know. I mean, what I've found so interesting about this is how much education has become an issue for the Republican caucus members, and how much this issue has kind of moved since the pandemic to now become a kind of center-right issue, where there's a lot of people trying to speak up about how they take over more control of their child's education and improve the quality of education. This is something that's been going on for so long. And I know with, as you mentioned, opportunity scholarships, hoping you can dive a little bit more into SB 220 that you're bringing forward.
Sure. And so SB 220 would increase the funding for opportunity scholarships. And we're very fortunate because Governor Lombardo put $50 million in this budget for opportunity scholarships. Right now, we only have about $13 million a year, which serves 1,600 students. So we could significantly expand those scholarships. And those scholarships are means tested, meaning the individuals who get those scholarships their families have to make less than, we're moving 300% of the federal poverty limit, but we're moving to 400, potentially 500% of the federal poverty limit, the FPL. So on average, I think the income for the household is about $58,000. So these are not scholarships for people who are affluent, who are already in private schools. These are scholarships for those who are zoned for underperforming schools, who have certain needs, so they want to go to a private school. And 2/3 of the students are people of color. And again, they're all low income. So it really can change their lives, the trajectory of their life and their success, if they're able to go to a school that better fits their needs.
And we see that when you see the test scores that have been administered in the data that's been released by the Department of Education, you see those educational gains, which is very encouraging to help change really a child's life and put them on a better path. One of the things that, a lot of people have questions is, what is the likelihood that these bills actually get a hearing and move forward? A lot of the Democrats have been critical of these programs, and it seems that they've tried to do everything the last few legislative sessions to hamper this program. Do you think the fact that we have a change in the governor makes it more likely that we're able to get a hearing on these pieces of legislation?
So I can tell you, Governor Lombardo is very committed. He talked about opportunity scholarships during his state address. And so he is committed, which will really help us. And typically we can negotiate this at the end of session. And you're right, they've cut back on the funding. We used to have an escalator, so 10% a year. And so the dollars were rising for this type of education. And you mentioned a few minutes ago too about COVID, and COVID with students being home, if they were in public schools oftentimes, and then being able to be in school if they're private schools, really highlighted some of the problems. So those that were in private schools or who were in private schools were able to continue their education mostly as normal. And those that were in public schools sometimes didn't have school for an entire year, like in classroom school for an entire year. And then some were hybrid. And also at that time, because the children were home, parents got more engaged and realized that they wanted to have more influence over their children's education. And so I think that's why they're turning to the charter schools, and there's a high level of interest in opportunity scholarships.
Yep. Something big is a brewing is how I feel about education and the way that it's heading. Shifting the conversation a little bit, I know you've introduced 3 other bills of note. One of them is to prosecute fentanyl traffickers within our state, and then 2 on the opioid settlements and generally the opioid crisis that we're seeing today across the whole country. Can you talk a little bit about first start off with the fentanyl traffickers bill?
Sure. Right now, before you're prosecuted for possession or for trafficking fentanyl, you have to have 100 grams on you. And in doing the research and talking to Metro Police and also the district attorneys in the state, we realized that 2 milligrams, 2 grains of salt is a lethal dose of fentanyl. So my bill proposes that somebody who is possessing an intent to traffic as little as 4 milligrams will be prosecuted. So my bill really is about taking fentanyl off the streets. Now, there's been a couple proposals that are out there by the Democrats, and they're at 4 grams. So I'm at 4 milligrams, and 2 milligrams again is lethal, and they're at 4 grams, which could kill thousands of people. And so I'm working really hard to make sure that we have a zero tolerance policy for any drugs that have fentanyl in them, and that we can prosecute them at low levels. And that's going to help make our community safer. And, we've had this opioid crisis going on for years now, and fentanyl has made it even more lethal than it was in the past. And then you also mentioned opioids. So you want me to roll into opioid?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so the state has been participating in a nationwide lawsuit around opioids, and essentially the state's starting to recoup some money from those cases. But what's happened is that the contingency rates allowed by the state for outside counsel in Nevada are up to 25%. So those rates, as late as 2017, there was actually a bill that in a conference committee, there was an amendment that changed what our rates were in 2017. So we used to have much lower percentage rates, as low as 2% for outside counsel, depending upon what the amount of settlement would be, with a cap of $10 million. That was moved to 25%. So now we have outside legal counsel getting between 19 and 21.5% of the money that's coming in based on the opioid settlements. And that's substantial. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. It's projected it could be $1 billion. And when you start thinking about, what's 20% of that, $200 million, that's a huge amount. And there's no cap, there's no firm cap on that. So I have a bill to change those to levels that 10 other states have, with a cap of $10 million. So it's still a significant cap, but it's really what other states are doing. And then just to note, during this opioid crisis and all these lawsuits, there was a federal judge in Ohio, his name's Polster, Judge Polster, Polster, who ruled that anything over 15% for these contingency contracts is presumptively unreasonable. Again, presumptively unreasonable if you're over 15%. And the state has contracts between 19 and 21.5%. And that's just sort of ongoing money. And it's also important to recognize, in addition to the contingency amount they get, they also get to cover certain costs. And those costs right now have added up to $24 million. So they get to recoup their cost, $24 million, and then they get the bonus, of course, of the contingency fees. So I have another bill that audits the $24 million to make sure that they're reasonable and accounted for if they're going to bill the state, and we're reimbursing them for that. It's my understanding that's very common when you look at trial attorneys and insurance companies, that insurance companies will audit the fees to make sure that they're reasonable when they're having to pay for those. So those are the two pieces: audit the money we're paying in expenses, and then lower the caps so that we don't get into a situation like this again, where we're paying 20+% on a settlement. And again, this was a national settlement. So it's completely different than a lot of things that we've had, and to have to pay that type of money is, I think, presumptively unreasonable.
Yeah, and all of that sounds like super important work. And a reminder for everyone, that would be SB 420 for the fee capping, and SB 377 for the actual auditing of these opioid settlements. Thank you so much, Senator Gansert, for joining us today. I don't know if you know this, we've been calling the Senate Minority Caucus the Great Eight, because we're really viewing you guys as kind of some of the best defenders for us here, really, in Carson City. So thank you for all the good work that you guys are doing, and I hope that we achieve some good things as we move on forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I have outstanding colleagues. We have very seasoned elected officials, senators. So I'm very, very grateful for my caucus and for their support. So we can, and for your support, so we can work with you to get the word out. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
So next up, we will have Senator Jeff Stone joining us.
That's awfully dark.
Oh,
hello.
and there he is. How are you doing, Senator?
Nice to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well. For everyone, Senator Jeff Stone, he's Republican representing SD 20 in Southern Nevada, serves on the Senate Commerce and Labor Committees, the Senate Health and Human Services, and the Senate Judiciary. Just very light, easy work committees, right?
Yeah, but it's great to be a part of the Great Eight. I just heard your description of our caucus, and I like that moniker.
I love it too. I mean, I really believe that this is some of the best credentialed caucus that I have seen in my short time working in Nevada. And when we look forward to all the stuff that there is great to do in our state, you guys are tons of experience. You in particular have dual service experience, having been in the legislature in both California and Nevada. Why don't you tell us a little about that, kind of your journey to join us here in the Nevada State Legislature?
Well, thank you. And it's an honor to be with you today. I'm actually a pharmacist by profession, and honestly never anticipated becoming an elected official until a fateful day in 1992 when I was in the new city of Temecula, and we started seeing some graffiti popping up, and my wife said, we don't want to see that. We got young kids there in town. And I said, I agree. She goes, you need to go to a city council meeting and complain about it. And so I did. So I never been to a city council meeting before, and I stood in line with 12 other people talking about barking dogs and things like that. And I finally get up and I'm shaking because I'm not used to speaking in public like this. And told the mayor that, I had an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old. We need to get rid of the graffiti early, otherwise it's going to be a problem that you're never going to have the budget to get rid of, and we're going to try gangs and drugs, etc. And he says, Mr. Stone, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of it. And he didn't take care of it. And so I took care of the situation. I ran against him and I beat him. And that's how my love affair with public service started. So I did 12 years on a city council, and then I was encouraged to run for a board of supervisors in Riverside County, California, which is the 10th largest county in the country, where an incumbent at that time hadn't been beaten 37 years. And so I campaigned hard and ended up defeating the incumbent and served 3 terms on the board, and then wanted to dabble in partisan politics, which I had never done before. And so I was elected to the California State Senate in 2014, was reelected in 2018, and then I was invited to become a part of the Trump administration to run the United States Department of Labor for the West Coast for the labor secretary, which I accepted, and that was my ticket to Nevada. And I have not looked back. My wife and I live in Henderson, Nevada, and we love it. And after Trump unfortunately didn't win a second term, I found myself for the first time unemployed. So, and yet, even though I turned 65 the same year, I still felt like I had a lot more to give, having served at every level of government, having a doctorate in pharmacy, taught it, owned and operated 6 drugstores and a respiratory company and a shipping company. And so an opportunity came up in Henderson where we had Dr. Hardy, who I know you know, and Keith Pickard. That Dr. Hardy was term limited out. Keith Pickard decided he didn't want to run, and so it was an open seat. I decided to run and got elected, and here we are.
Well, it's great to have you. I just have one more question on this is, so what are the differences between Nevada and California? I guess what has stuck out to you the most?
Well,
in the legislature process, that is.
Yeah. So the first issue I'll tell you about is that I probably should have appreciated my staff in the state of California more than I did, because I had 12 staff members of my own, and I had about 50 caucus staff that were partisan that helped me analyze the bills and make recommendations on how we could change bills to make them better or how we could kill the bills. And you also have to remember that in California, we got 40 million people. So the legislature there, the Senate is 40 members versus 21 members here. So I represented 1 million people in California versus 150,000 here. So, but one of the attractive things that I liked about Nevada is that you had legislators there only 4 months every other year that could do damage in the way of overregulating and overtaxing. And so I found that very attractive. So I'm allowed during session to have 1 employee, and I'm very, very fortunate that my legislative aide that I had in the Board of Supervisors in Riverside County followed me to Nevada and told me if I got elected, she wanted to work for me again. And so we're the dynamic duo here. You talk about the great 8. We're the dynamic duo that does the work of 4 or 5 people. And so I have to analyze the bills. I've got to return all my emails on my own. We just don't get the staff to do it. So I tell people it's not like drinking out of 1 fire hose. It's like drinking out of 3 fire hoses. And because I read the bills, and you'll see, if you haven't seen already, that I will be an active participant on the floor to support bills and to oppose bills. And there is some good legislation that's coming out of the building here, but there's also some really toxic legislation that's coming out of the building. And I think with my background, I'll be able to make a convincing argument for our constituents that the bills that are being passed that are not in the best interest of our constituents need further looking at. And I just want them to know that I'm their voice, I'm their vote, and I'm standing up for what they think is right.
I will say, you and Ms. Hara are definitely hard workers up there for sure. I do want to spotlight one bill in particular, which I think it will be the gold standard moving forward for occupational licensing reform, and that's Senate Bill 399. It's kind of a universal recognition bill that you mentioned you've modeled after what Ducey did in Arizona, but it might be even broader. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish, what's inside the legislation, and your thoughts on the likelihood of it at least getting a hearing?
So thank you. And I agree with you. I consider that bill the main event of my bill portfolio. And in a bipartisan way, everyone will tell you in this building that we have a shortage of healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, physical therapists, behavioral health practitioners. There's just not enough. I think we rank as far as physicians to population, probably one of the worst states in the entire country. And it's really an issue in some of these rural areas that have hospitals that are 25, 30 miles away and have limited services for them. And so when I was working for Trump, I was ordered by our Secretary of Labor, Eugene Scalia, who's a friend and actually endorsed me for this run, wanted me to work closely with the Ducey administration because the labor secretary had two goals. One, he wanted occupational licensing reforms throughout the country, and he wanted to promote apprenticeship programs for people that needed to learn a trade and did not want to go to college. And so we worked with the Ducey administration, and that legislation came about during COVID when they realized that we have a very sick population of people. And we don't have enough healthcare providers to take care of these people, especially a lot of senior citizens that were getting sick. And so Governor Ducey brought his staff together and said, how can we get an influx of healthcare providers here to take care of this pandemic emergency that we're faced with? And his staff was giving him a lot of recommendations. Well, you should increase slots in the medical schools and the nursing schools. And he said, but that's not going to get me nurses or doctors for 4 or 5 years. We need them today. And so one of his bright staff members, I think our Secretary of Labor had an input on this and said, hey, listen, we got to make it easier for physicians, nurses, et cetera, that are practicing in other states, that want to leave other states and come to our state, and make it an easier process. Because he discovered in the state of Arizona, it was very difficult to get out-of-state providers to come in there because their boards were so subjective and obstructive. And so he basically said through his legislation that if you're looking to attract nurses, if you're a practicing nurse, let's say in Idaho, and you've gone to a reputable nursing school, you have done your residency programs, you have your experience, you don't have any disciplinary actions against you, your license is a good standing, that the nursing board in, let's say, Arizona shall issue you a license within a specified period of time after you've completed only one exam, and that's a jurisprudence exam, because the laws, of course, in every state governing professions is a little bit different, but that's the easier portion of the test. So when you start attracting physicians, the last thing a physician wants to do, let's say a 25-year oncologist that is practicing in the state of Washington, the last thing he wants to do is have to study for a board exam proving that he can practice medicine. He's not only a physician, he's a specialist, and we need more oncologists, pediatric oncologists, certainly in Nevada. So my goal in this legislation is this, that if you are a bona fide healthcare professional or a teacher or a public defender, and you want to leave your state that you're working in and you want to come into Nevada, that I want to put legislation forward that requires these boards and commissions overseeing these jobs to have a mandate to issue them licenses, as long as they follow the criteria that I've explained to you. And that's how you're going to get an influx of healthcare professionals and public defenders and teachers. So I want teachers included in this, so that we can fill the vacancies that we have here in Nevada and provide the healthcare that we certainly need, and get off of this terrible statistic of being 25th in the deliverance of healthcare and have access and give the citizens an assurance that if they get sick for any condition, that they don't have to go to Stanford University or UCLA or the Mayo Clinic in Arizona to get care. They can get it right here at home with the confidence that they're going to have competent medical practitioners overseeing their healthcare. I call it medical exportation, where we export in Nevada hundreds of millions of dollars that go to fine universities, fine hospitals throughout the United States. I want to keep that money here, and I want that expertise here, so we don't see that flight of patients having to pack up their bags and move away from their families to get cancer treatments or emphysema treatments or MS treatments, et cetera.
And I think this is one of the highest priorities that we need to tackle as a state. Overall, our occupational licensing regimes are kind of chaotic, and we're experiencing great growth. Our state has been doubling in population. There's no sign of that slowing down. People don't lose and forget their skills that they have learned and practiced in their state just because they cross the border and move into Nevada. If anything, we should be encouraging people to bring their skills, their talents, and put it to work right here in our economy so we can continue to grow, increase wealth for everyone. And, rising tide lifts all ships. So thank you so much for bringing this important piece of legislation forward. It is a pleasure to speak with you today, Senator. And hopefully we can have you back on later in the session with some good news that we made some positive reforms.
I would enjoy that. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. It's a pleasure to have you here. Have a good week.
You too. Take care. Bye.
So next up, we have Dean Clancy. He is the Senior Health Policy Fellow at Americans for Prosperity. I think that was the last conversation was a good transition over. Thank you so much for joining us. You have been a healthcare advocate all across the country with 20 years of experience in both Congress, the White House, and at the federal level. So thank you so much for joining us. There's a couple of things I want to talk about in this healthcare realm. One of them being the public option. We've had these conversations in the past, especially last legislative session, they jammed through that SB 420 that would set up a public option here in Nevada in the future. This is one part of a larger assault in our state by the Democrats and the far left to take over healthcare by price fixing all over prescriptions as well as outpatient procedures. Dean, I think I know the answer to this question, but do you think this is the right path forward? And if not, what's the best alternative?
Well, Marcos, you're absolutely right. A public option, so-called, is not the right way to go for Nevada. At Americans for Prosperity, we strongly opposed SB 420 before it was enacted. We're happy that its sort of threat of government intervention in the market doesn't take place until the beginning of the year 2026. So we have time to try to repeal this law or amend it so that it doesn't harm markets. The problem when you expand government in healthcare is you almost always make things worse. It will lead to higher costs. And we know this. 3 other states, Washington, Colorado, and suddenly I'm blanking. I guess Nevada, you're the 3rd state. Sorry, 3 states have done this so far. In those 2 other states, it has not lowered healthcare costs. In fact, in Washington state, where what they did was make all the private health insurers offer a so-called public option plan, cost of action, nobody's buying the plans. The public option plans are not popular. So public option is the wrong way to go. Instead, at AFP, we say, let's give people a personal option. What is a personal option? That's letting you have a tax-free health savings account. So you can pay for health care and save for it tax-free. And what you don't spend, you save and build up a nest egg for future health costs. 9 in 10 Americans have no access to a tax-free HSA today. Let's make it 100% of Americans do have access. Second, all the money that government is spending on healthcare, almost all of that is going to insurance companies. We say that money should go to patients, not to insurance companies. So let's reform those programs like Obamacare, Medicare, Medicaid. Let's keep the safety nets, but the money should go to the patient, not to insurance companies. And the third thing, as part of a personal option, is let's remove barriers between patients and care. Antiquated rules that make it hard to add new hospital beds or make it hard to train new physicians and nurses. You were just talking about that with Senator Stone. There are a bunch of these government rules, red tape, and barriers that just need to be removed so that patients can actually access care. One of the most exciting ways to do that, Marcos, is a new model called direct patient care, it's like a Netflix subscription to your favorite doctors. There's no insurance involvement. You just subscribe. And when you have a question, they answer. I mean, let me ask you a question. Do you have your doctor's personal cell phone number? My guess is if you're on traditional insurance, you don't. But if you have a direct patient care subscription, you probably do. And your doctor will probably answer your questions at all hours because they're working for you, not for an insurance company. Anyway, so that's the answer to your question. Public option, bad. Personal option, good. Let's empower patients rather than insurance companies.
And this is one issue that I feel the larger movement, we were on the offensive for many years. And I think helped deliver a lot of friendly allies through 2016. But it seems like the movement now has kind of switched to a defense, unfortunately, on the issue of healthcare. How do we take over this issue once again and really tell the public that we have a better proposal and a better option when it comes to healthcare?
No, you are absolutely right. There is no reason why people who believe in markets and want to make healthcare better, conservatives, libertarians, Republicans, and everybody shouldn't want to make healthcare better and nobody should be afraid of this issue. We've done a lot of polling at Americans for Prosperity. One thing we found is 70% of people, and this includes a lot of Democrats, they want Republicans to talk about healthcare and talk about their ideas. Republicans have been gun shy since the repeal and replace debate, which sort of fizzled out in 2017 after years of saying we're going to fix healthcare, and then it didn't happen. Meanwhile, Obamacare has caused health insurance premiums to double, and the amount you have to pay out of pocket before your insurance kicks in has tripled, and it's getting harder and harder to find a doctor that's actually in your health insurance network. Obamacare has made things worse. We need people with good incremental ideas to step up and explain them to the voters. And what we find is voters respond. We asked voters, what would you rather have, Medicare for all or a personal option like what I described? It was 70-30 in favor of a personal option. That means a lot of the Democrats in our poll would rather have things like more choice and control and less help to insurance companies. They're not looking for a government takeover. And by the way, the biggest numbers in favor of the personal option were women, Hispanics, independents, and even half of Democrats preferred a personal option over Medicare for all. So there's no reason for Republican candidates to be shy about these things. And it's very clear that President Biden is running for re-election on healthcare. Our polls confirm what it's from his actions we can see. He can't run on inflation or jobs or foreign policy or crime. So he's running on scaring people, saying they want to take away your healthcare. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And the fact is, if they meet him on that issue, they can win, because all he's proposing is payroll tax hikes to fund Medicare and cutting Medicare Advantage, which is going to hit millions of seniors. And the fact is, we can do much better with a personal option.
One last question before we move on to the Assemblywoman. So government price fixing for outpatient procedures. This is Assembly Bill 85 being presented by Assemblyman Orentlicker. This was literally one of the craziest proposals I have heard in a long, long time. It's just government price fixing of surgeries. I mean, what are some of your thoughts on this? So how do we combat this? If it just feels like price fixing, this is something that the economic literature is very clear it doesn't work.
Absolutely. Price controls always cause scarcity, shortages, and often higher prices. Ultimately, people have to resort to, the black market. If you can't let supply and demand meet in a market clearing price, you're going to result in harming people. That's what's going to happen. The bill you mentioned, I've read that bill. I was shocked because it's like something out of the old Soviet Union. It's just government dictating the prices of services and goods in the medical sector. And it's, of course, a logical follow-on to SB 420 and the public option. It's a creeping government takeover of healthcare in Nevada. It's a terrible idea, and we need to stop it. But hopefully we can, in fact, stop it. I know it's tough. As I recall, there's a governor now in Nevada that might be able to help stop it. But it's sad that we even have to fight the fight. But AFP is very much opposed to AB 85, or is it SB 85? I'm now blocking. And we want to kill it, and we need everybody's help to do it.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned the Soviet Union. I was listening to an old keynote speech the other day from Milton Friedman, and he was addressing the crowd, and he goes, you know, we watched socialism lose to market capitalism in the 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then all the Western countries said, you know what, we need more socialism.
Yep.
And I was just had me laughing, because it's kind of sad, but that's kind of what the discussion is going on within our societies these days, rehashing old battles. But thank you so much for joining us, Dean. I hope you have a great day. And thank you for joining us. I mean, you just got off of a plane. You're the best.
Well, no, you're the best. But really, seriously, thank you. It was my pleasure.
So joining us next, we have Assemblywoman Danielle Gallant. She serves on Assembly Growth and Infrastructure, Assembly Judiciary, Assembly Revenue. She's a freshman legislator. So welcome. How are you? It's good to see you.
Hi, Marcos. I'm doing good. It's nice that it's Friday. I get on a plane in a couple hours and go see my family. So Fridays are always good days.
Perfect. Well, I don't want to impede you from your travel. But some of the things I want to discuss is, so what is it like being a freshman legislator? What is going on the Assembly? We call you guys, by the way, the Fabulous 14. That was coined by PK O'Neill when he was here last month. So how is it like being on that side?
So it's definitely interesting. You know, it's been a bit of something to get used to, because I'm a small businesswoman. I get to pretty much call my own schedule. So I have a lot of autonomy in my personal life. And now I'm in a place where we have no autonomy. The Democrats are the ones that set the schedule. They decide which bills are going to be heard. They decide what tone you're going to have in each hearing or in each committee. So between my three committees, Judiciary, we have to see a lot of bills. Like it's a very intense committee. And so time is very important in terms of managing it. However, our chair is very, very strict. And so sometimes we find that very limiting. And then I have growth and infrastructure. Howard Watts has been an amazing chair, very fair, very reasonable, and really good at time management as well. And then Shay Bacchus is the chair for revenue, and she just loves as much information as you can. But it can cause those hearings to go a little bit longer. So it's interesting to see the different personalities, but I'm enjoying all the committees. I'm learning so much. So I feel like I'm back in my master's program again, just getting flooded with new information, and I'm soaking it up like a sponge.
And I think those are pretty fair assessments of those different members. Actually, Bacchus used to be my representative when I lived in her district, and she would always ask for more and more information. So that's definitely a fair representation. So what are some of your priorities? What are some of the things that you came in, you're like, this is why I'm running, and this is what I want to do and help Nevada out with?
So, you know, part of when you start this process, there's always something very personal. And I'm in the middle of COVID. I've been stuck at home for 6 months with my two kids, trying to Zoom them and education. And I'm in property management with this eviction moratorium. And then you find out that seat's going to open, and you're like, we need some common sense. Like, we need to start giving some balance back to not like what we like to push as the victim, right? The tenant is the victim, women are victims, like everybody's a victim, but anybody who's white and has money is not the victim. And, and we've been the victim, and I don't want to say, like, my landlords are very diverse. So, but my landlords have been victimized over the last 2 years with the mandates and some of the legislation that has come through. So that was like really my first reasoning. Now that I'm here, you realize, like, I'm not here just to represent like moms and kids and property managers and landlords and property rights. Like, it's so much bigger than that. And so for me, a lot of my focus has been, are we deregulating and are we giving more power and more freedom back to the constituents across the board? So that for me is like my overall theme in how I attack and look at each and every bill.
And that is a refreshing point of view to hear. It's always good to have more freedom fighters under the dome. One of the bills actually that you presented recently, which we are definitely fans of, is protections for home-based businesses from local governments, counties, kind of limiting the power of them, treating them differently. Can you tell us a little bit more about this piece of legislation and what people can do if they want to support this?
Yeah, so it's so the home-based protection bill, it's actually, I literally stole it straight from Florida. They implemented this maybe about a year or two ago. I believe it really birthed out of the whole COVID pandemic where everybody was working from home. And then a lot of us, including myself, said, hey, this is better for our work-life balance, and we're going to keep working from home. And Florida is a lot like Nevada in terms of communities, particularly Southern Nevada, where there's a lot of HOAs. And so Florida implemented this, saying, like, the local municipalities, you can't prohibit a home-based business. However, you can still regulate it. And so that's essentially what we introduced. It came with a lot of opposition from our municipalities. Even though I did meet with them several days before the hearing, thought we had come to an agreement, and then things kind of got changed a lot by the time I got into the hearing. However, it's not dead. We're still working with stakeholders, helping them educate, helping to educate them that we're not taking away the municipalities' rights. They can still regulate all they want under, their various regulations and statutes. But just that they're not going to be allowed to take it away. It's definitely piqued some interest with some other stakeholders that I wasn't expecting, and so I've got some groups that are supporting this and are now kind of lobbying on my behalf, which is nice because things are really ramping up, and there's a lot more bills to read. The hearings are going longer. And so it's helpful to have some teamwork going on in the process in the background.
And this is going to, again, a wonderful piece of legislation. So thank you for bringing it forward. Another topic I do want to touch on is something that we discussed actually recently, which was school choice and education. What is the general vibe? I know you're an advocate for school choice, but what is kind of the general vibe you guys are feeling on the assembly side when it comes to the potential of opportunity scholarships and other pieces of legislation moving it through?
On both sides?
On your side.
On our side, we're all 100% support of it. Like, our caucus is very, very focused on ensuring that we can improve our education. We understand that that is integral in improving our workforce. And so we've been, working closely with the governor and his agenda and his bills that he's put forth to expand that. And, the opportunity scholarship, it's actually quite interesting. I was talking to the governor's staff the other day, and they gave us this really nice kind of one-page sheet and pointers on it. And it will cover families that make $250,000 or less based on familial size, which really encompasses a huge proportion of Nevadan families. So I was really happy to hear that. I got involved, part of the reason why I got involved in the political process is when Scott Hammond introduced the ESA bill. And I've got this little boy, he's 5 years old, and he's very precocious and very bright. And we realized he was not going to be a good fit for public schools. He needed something much faster paced. And we hadn't budgeted for private school. And we kind of had to really scramble and really cut back on certain things so that we could provide that for him. But if we were able to get $5,000 for him every single year, that would have made things a lot easier. Because we also support my mom as well. So we support 2 households. So we have a lot on our plate, but we've managed to make it work because education is very important to us. But not all families have the same resources that we've been able to pull together.
And that is why it's so important to get these pieces of legislation through. I think one of the biggest losses when we look around the whole country was our loss of ESAs that Scott Hammond brought forward. I mean, we're seeing all across the country. This is one of the biggest moves in education, is enacting this piece of legislation. And a lot of our neighboring states, such as Utah and Arizona, now have it on the books. So this is something of potential competition for both business and parents and families when they're looking at where they're going to settle down and send their child to education as well. Are you going to go to a non-ESA state or an ESA state? So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Is there anything else before we kind of wrap up here that you would like to have our listeners know that you're either supporting or pushing for?
Well, I actually wanted to go back onto the ESA and with the other states, because there is a silver lining. If it wasn't for Senator Hammond and him implementing this ESA here in Nevada, we would not be seeing it in the neighboring states like we are. What is it? Success is a road of, for failure leads to a road of success, right? And Nevada was the one, and Scott Hammond was the one that really, really sparked this movement. And so West Virginia was the first state to take a look at our ESA, improve upon it, and implement it. Then Arizona took what West Virginia did, and they improved upon it and have implemented it. So we really sparked this movement, and we have Scott Hammond to thank for that. And so I think there's a silver lining, and I think we have an opportunity to take what they're doing in Arizona and bring it here, which Scott has brought forward. So we're, it's not all for naught, right?
No.
In terms of some other bills, like something really, there's times where you all of a sudden just get really shocked. And I know the commerce tax. Why am I blanking on this? I've been doing this all day. Not the commerce tax, the one that gets everybody upset here in the state.
I think it's the commerce tax. I mean, I would argue it's all
tax.
taxes get everyone upset in the state.
The one where over 4 million, once you gross over 4 million, they get that. It's the commerce tax. Okay. So I'm in revenue last night, and Assemblywoman Constantine has introduced a bill which highlights the fact that REITs are exempt from the commerce tax. And as somebody who's in the real estate business, REITs are the most detrimental thing to middle class homeownership. They come into to the market. They offer all cash, 10-day close. The middle class homeowner that needs a loan, they cannot compete. And I know Georgia and Hawaii have implemented legislation where it limits how much the REITs have, been able to purchase, which I don't love that. But it sort of opened my eyes that I said, well, that's not fair, because the REITs are engaging in the same business that I am. They're buying, selling, flipping, and renting houses. That's what my business is. And yet I would be, if I got big enough, I would be have to pay that commerce tax, but yet somehow they are exempt. And all of that money goes outside of our state. Now, I'm not saying I want to raise taxes, but I think it was an interesting proposal that we need to really take a look at and see if it's something that will help deter the REITs within Nevada, so that we can give homeownership a better shot moving forward, because that's just good for Nevadans. So watch it. I'm working with some stakeholders to see if we can find something that's going to, be good for everyone. But again, it would not include raising taxes, but just keep your eye on that one.
For sure. And of course, we also need more home construction in our state. Definitely something that we've been lagging. I think the most recent figures were tens of thousands of units short for our growing population. And the more housing supply we have, the more affordable homes become, and rents come down as well as a result. But thank you so much, Assemblywoman, for joining us today. And we hope to have you on again soon. And I hope you have a great weekend, a great week.
Thanks so much, Marcos. You too.
So next up, we have our very own Geoffrey Lawrence. Let me get one quick second here. All right, making a change. Perfect. So Geoffrey Lawrence here is the Director of Research in Nevada Policy and the Reason Foundation. He has plenty of experience in the public and private sector, serving as the Chief Financial Officer of several growth stage and publicly traded manufacturing companies, as well as being the Assistant Controller for our great state of Nevada. How are you doing, Jeff?
Good to see you, Marcus. How are you?
I'm doing good. It is a little personal full circle moment for me. I remember moving to Nevada and reading your research at Nevada Policy when I first moved, trying to grasp the interworkings of the state. And now having the opportunity to work for you with you is a great privilege. So it is awesome to have you on. One of the items that I wanted to talk was just unions on the march. It just feels like they're very greedy this legislative session. They're eyeballing that surplus and seeing how can we maximize everything. So kind of what is your general feeling about what's going on in the public sector unions and their aggressiveness in particular this legislative session?
I don't think it's necessarily new. It's that the opportunity is there, and when blood is in the water, the sharks come swimming. So the public sector unions have pushed for a number of entitlement expansions this session. Well, to start with, there is a bill that would allow a collective bargaining for tenured university professors, which is kind of the last group in the state that is not unionized. And typically, this is very rare. Most states every state has a public university. Almost none of them are unionized because kind of the whole point of tenure is that you have a protected position. You don't need to be part of a union. And indeed, most professors don't prefer to be in a union because one of the points of tenure is that it protects your freedom of speech if you're teaching a topic that is controversial, right? But being a union member strips your voice away because if you become subject to a union bargaining group, whether you chose to be or not, the way when they organize, they have, there might be multiple organizations that want to represent a bargaining group, and they'll put it to a secret ballot. And if 50% plus one of the people who spend the time to go vote, select one of the unions, and that becomes the exclusive bargaining agent. Now, the exclusive bargaining agent language is important because it means that even if you didn't vote to become part of this union, now you are no longer allowed to speak on your own behalf to your supervisor about working hours and conditions and, hey, I just had this thing happen with my family the other day. Can we talk about a raise? You're not allowed to say those things on your own anymore. And if you do get in a disciplinary hearing, you can't represent yourself. The union rep has to be there, whether or not you want them to be. So this is kind of, especially for a profession that likes to see themselves as very independent, this is kind of anti-democratic. So that's the first bill of concern. There's also one out there that would increase the prevailing wage standards, which basically requires, technically it doesn't require union contracts or union pay on all publicly funded construction, but in practice, the way it's run, it does, because the way the surveys are set up, only union firms can respond. And so unions wind up capturing all the prevailing wages. So prevailing wage, because it requires basically unionization of all public works projects, it escalates the labor cost component of those projects. And it's amazing that the studies that have looked at how much of a premium there is there are remarkably consistent, whether it's studies done here in Nevada or Michigan or elsewhere in the country. They all say that somewhere between 40 and 60% wage premium due to prevailing wage, and that raises the overall cost of any public work by 10 to 15%. So when a state's taking on $5 billion of construction projects a year, that adds up pretty quickly. And it means that there's not as much money available for things like public schooling or your local library. So, the union squeezing out the benefits that, or the, kind of public services that most taxpayers think that they're paying for.
And I think it's an important thing to mark. I mean, that explicitly translates into you're getting 40 to 60% less for bang for your buck when you're trying to build anything. That's less schools, less police stations, less road construction going on. It's just swallowing up all of our public infrastructure spending in our state. And this bill would expand it to virtually everything. And, there's been a lot of concern about local governments that are trying to invest and create separate little projects. That this means is that they have less money to work with. And this should be a serious concern for anyone who's interested in fiscal responsibility. I mean, if the state has to act as a fiduciary for public funds and you're purposely wasting 40 to 60% of the funding on projects just to give it away to pay a premium that has no connection to increased quality, all it does is just eat up taxpayer money. It should be extreme concern, and it's not something no fiscal conservative should be supporting.
Yeah, and actually there's a provision in that bill that I think is misdrafted, but whether it's intended or not, it's really dangerous because it says that any property that a state or local government has even a contingent claim to is subject to prevailing wage. So, if your house is in Clark County has a contingent claim to every house, because if you don't pay your property taxes, they can seize that asset. So there's an argument that the way that bill is drafted, it requires union pay on every construction project in Nevada, whether it's public or not.
That is absurd. And again, this is something that we encourage everyone. The main focal point is likely going to be a governor veto to defeat this legislation. They're going to try to get that through, and just, unless it has a 2/3, I don't think it does, this will be moving forward. This is being brought forward by both Senate Majority Leader Nicole Canizero and Speaker of the Assembly, Steve Yeager. So very likely that this does move through since the leadership. It's definitely something we encourage the governor to veto. One more item I did want to touch on was PERS overall. That's the Public Employee Retirement System. It has recently hit $8 billion in the hole. I've talked to some legislators that are not concerned about it. They say, oh, the PERS director comes to us and they said that they're not concerned, that everything's okay. This is a wildly large unfunded liability to deal with that's going to eventually crowd out public funding. What is your kind of response to some of these arguments?
It's already crowding out public funding, right? And it's to the expense of both taxpayers and public employees, because the way it works is as the unfunded portion of the liability grows, because they don't meet their investment targets or some other assumption didn't pan out, and it does grow almost every year, the actuary will look at that and say, okay, now in order to make up what we expect to be your future liability, we're going to increase your current contribution rates, right? So the contribution rates that have to be paid out of every paycheck that are withheld from employees and matched by the employer have increased about 3 times in the last decade, but for the last 25 years have increased about a dozen times, and that's a lot. So now it's something like 28 or 29% of pay is being withheld for future pension benefits, which is insane. Like, I don't think anyone else, there's no other job that you could take where they'd be withholding that much for retirement benefits. So it hurts both the employees and the taxpayers who are matching the withholding.
And I think this is just a small part of a larger issue that I think we're going to be seeing in the next 10 to 15 years. I think serious fiscal fights are going to be occurring. It's almost going to be a, libertarianism by bankruptcy situation. Social Security is going to go insolvent. There are issues on the federal level with all sorts of unfunded liabilities. We're going to be dealing with these also in the future in the state level. It's going to be a turbulent time, I think, for fiscal policy. It's kind of almost sadly going to be an "we told you so" situation.
Oh yeah, and this is something that it comes out of every government's operating budget, right? So if you're you're sending your kids to school in, let's say, Douglas County School District, a big chunk of that that money that you think is being spent on those schools is actually coming out off the top to pay retirement benefits and not going into the classroom.
Well, do you have some good news to leave us with?
Well, I think a really exciting news that you started out with talking about school choice, and certainly Assemblywoman Gallant made a great point that, despite Nevada not being able to implement its ESA bill, now 8 states have universal ESAs. Small hiccup yesterday in Georgia, but looks like the second and third largest, most populous states will soon have universal ESAs. Just enacted in Florida, will soon pass in Texas. So nationwide, looking pretty good. Here in Nevada, it's we're incrementally getting there. We're going to have bigger opportunity scholarships.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Geoffrey. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Hope you could come on later on the program as the session progresses. So
Sure.
Everyone, thank you so much. So just a few housekeeping items. Coming up, we will have a massive update to our bill tracker going live. Hopefully by Monday. There's been so much pieces of legislation that has dropped. I also recommend you guys to checking out Free to Offend. Rees Empry joined from the Libertas Institute to talk about regulatory sandboxes. This is something that's been taken off in select states all across the nation, both red and blues, as a way to increase innovation and drive positive reforms in the regulatory framework. Our next briefing call will be next week at 2 p.m. as an audio only, with the last Friday being another live segment where we will interview legislators and lobbyists. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys all take care.